Africa organization has rubbished claims that reigning Miss South Africa has pulled out of the Miss Universe pageant next month. It follows reports that Lalela Mswane will no longer be participating in the event taking place in Israel. But Miss SA CEO Stephanie Wale says these claims are unfounded and untrue, adding that Mswane will not allow herself to be bullied. Wale further adds that they are not a political organization and that the Miss Universe pageant is not a politically inspired event. Now, the organization Africa for Palestine is against Miss SA's participation at the event. For more on this and for the context on the Palestine-Israeli conflict, we're joined now by the Executive Director of the Afro-Middle East Center, Jeenah. Naeem, good evening and thank you very much for your time joining us tonight here on In Focus. Give us the context then of this current debate and why the pageant has been brought in to this particular debate.
Well, the reason that the pageant is relevant is that there has been a call from Palestinian civil society and political organizations from 15 years ago for a campaign of boycotts, divestments and sanctions against the State of Israel. That the State of Israel is a state that practices apartheid, and like the South African apartheid state of the past, which was in a sense brought to its knees by a global sanctions campaign, Palestinians have called for a similar campaign against the Israeli state. That campaign includes an academic boycott, a cultural, sporting boycott, etc. And certainly these pageants form part of that kind of boycott tactic that Palestinian civil society has called for. Hence the furore around it now.
Yeah. What would be the impact then of this cultural boycott?
Well, the impact would be, as in the case of South Africa, that a cultural boycott will be, of course, part of that's how it's envisaged, a part of a bigger package of boycott sanctions measures against the Israeli state, with the objective to isolate Israel on the global scene, to ensure that no companies, no states do business with it, and therefore force it to give in to demands of the boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign.
Yeah. What does it mean then that the pageant organizers in South Africa are refusing, or at least choosing, not to go with that line of thinking?
Well, I think, the kind of excuse that they're giving about being apolitical. Really, first, let me just say that all of these pageant organizations, whether it's Miss South Africa, Miss Universe, Miss World, whatever they are a capitalist, commercialist institutions that objectify women. This is what they do. So the problem about Miss South Africa and Miss World is much bigger than whether Miss South Africa goes to Israel or not. And I think this comes out very clearly in the Miss South Africa CEO statements. Very paternalistic statement towards black women in general. And you will remember that black women were only able to participate in the Miss South Africa contest anyway in the 90s. They were not allowed to before that. So the whole pageant idea is a problem from a perspective of justice, and particularly gender justice. But the notion that they don't involve themselves in politics. Well, when you are an institution that excluded black women, then you're involved in politics. When the rest of the world boycotted Miss South Africa contestants because of apartheid, that was political. So now you're saying that Miss South Africa doesn't involve itself in politics and will perform or will send its contestant to an apartheid state. It really smacks of opportunism and hypocrisy, and frankly, it smacks of a throwback to the era when Miss South Africa supported apartheid.
Yeah.
The institution.
What does it mean then for the efforts? And of course, we know South Africa's position on the matter. But that, for example, the U.S. has reversed its punitive measures on Israel. It became by far, I suppose, in the last year under the administration of Trump, the biggest recipient of U.S. aid, but also the AU choosing to rescind Israel's observer status.
Well, in terms of the U.S., Israel has been for about 5 decades now the largest recipient of U.S. aid. Then nothing has changed there. The U.S. continues to virtually uncritically support Israel in all its things. As far as the AU is concerned, Israel has worked extremely hard in the past 3 or 4 decades to build relations on the continent. And it's quite sad that African states, which, until recently had prided themselves on fighting against colonialism, against racism, against apartheid, etc., now have decided to accredit Israel, particularly when you look at the African Charter for Peoples and Human Rights, which makes it a goal of African member states or member states of the AU, makes it a goal to fight against Zionism, which is the ideology of the State of Israel. So on the one hand, it says that African states are backtracking on their commitment to justice, on their commitment to fight colonialism and apartheid and Zionism. And I think that this is a situation which, if not rectified, will have serious consequences, moral, political, and otherwise, for the African continent as a whole and African states individually.
Yeah. Now, Israel has designated 6 prominent Palestinian human rights groups as terrorist organizations just last month. Is this a hoax? What do you make of this tactic by Israel?
Well, one thing that it does is it makes it clear that what is being called a Palestinian state is neither sovereign nor independent, that it remains under occupation by the Israeli state. These organizations they're not based in Israel. They're Palestinian organizations based in the West Bank in Palestine. They've been designated in this kind of way, and the designation, interestingly, came from the Minister of Defense, not the Minister of Justice or the Minister of Police. Why? Because the West Bank is under military occupation. This is what we're seeing. And clearly it is another attempt, among numerous other attempts, by Israel to silence any dissidents and even silence human rights defenders. It does this both within Israel itself and certainly in the West Bank, Gaza, etc. These have been designated in this kind of way, which now, in terms of Israeli law, gives Israel the right to go in to the West Bank, to raid these offices, to arrest of these organizations, to arrest their staff members, board members, etc. And the response from the UN, from European states, from the EU, etc., is very telling. That clearly all that Israel is doing is using its jackboot in order to prevent any kind of criticism of its apartheid and colonial policies. I don't think that this is going to succeed in the long term. Certainly the kind of criticism we're seeing for this particular action is an indication of that, but it is an indication of what kind of politics Israel engages in, and it gives a lie to this notion that Israel likes to promote and propagate, that it is a democracy, that it is the only democracy in the Middle East, etc. Israel is essentially an apartheid state and an ethnocratic state that is set up to serve only one ethnic group, not to serve its citizens.
Yeah. Al-Jamaa, political party, saying that they will be coming together with some of the role players in the upcoming demonstrations organized by Palestinian solidarity activists. What are these demonstrations about, and what's the message that they carry?
I'm not sure. I can't speak on behalf of the Palestinian solidarity organizations or their demonstrations. fairly ignorant about that.
Oh, all right. So yourself, you will not be participating in these demonstrations because they are, of course, targeted at the Miss SA organizers to send, who are wanting to send a representative to Israel. They're saying they want to do this to send a clear message that they do not support or condone this decision.
I'm an academic. I'm a commentator and an analyst. I might participate in demonstrations. I might not. I don't know about the demonstrations taking place. But clearly, what we're seeing, certainly on social media, is a great deal of anger, particularly from Black South Africans, about how this matter has been handled. There was a call for this boycott from Mandla Mandela. The Miss South Africa CEO's comments about this, as I said, very paternalistic, frankly, I would say racist, very colonial-minded, and the anger towards that is certainly visible among many black people in South Africa in general, and I think that I wouldn't be surprised that will play out on the streets in terms of protests, etc. And good luck to them.
Naeem, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming through. Executive Director of the Afro-Middle East Center there, Naeem Jeenah. And of course, it's correct. There's been a whole lot of reaction on social media to this particular story. We ran a poll here on Newzroom Afrika, channel 405, asking particularly that question on whether or not Miss South Africa should go ahead and participate or withdraw from the Miss Universe event in Israel in solidarity with the people of Palestine. 43.1% of you saying withdraw, 40.8% of you saying ignore and compete, and 16.1% saying I don't have an opinion. That's the poll we've been running here on Newzroom Afrika.